It seems like we're surrounded by a bunch of friends. I want to welcome everyone to District Hall and Venture Cafe Providence. This is our Tuesday pop-up series. Every Tuesday at 10 o'clock, we welcome new discussions and entrepreneurs to talk about their ideas. And today, we're welcomed by Dom Messerli, an entrepreneur and board member at Rhode Island Bio, to discuss medical device trials, especially in today's environment. And also, I'm very excited to hear about some of the progress he's making and some of how this relates to some of the work he's doing with his biologic implant that he's developing himself and he's been working on for a while. So Dom, thanks so much for joining us, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Avi. I really appreciate the introduction, and thank you to you, your team, and the Venture Cafe to have me this morning. And also welcome to the people that are listening to this on the recording as well. This is going to be a little bit of interactive today, and Carol Melise, she asked me a couple of days ago, I said, hey, Dom, would you be interested in sharing some information about clinical trials during these times? And I said, well, yeah, most certainly, because with my startup business, I'm in the middle of a clinical trial. So I can share some of the experiences that I have currently going on. So as Avi said, my name is Dom Messerli. I'm the president and CEO of Lennox Medical, a startup in the Providence area, but also I'm a member of Rhode Island Bio, a local organization that's really an advocate for any entrepreneur and startups and life science economy here in Rhode Island. So I'm very honored to be part of that group as well. And me personally, I've been in the medical device industry for over 25 years. I've worked more or less for two companies, for a company called Synthes, and then Synthes was acquired by Johnson & Johnson. So I was working a couple of years for Johnson & Johnson before I started my own company. But envision this. So here is February 28th. I wake up early in the morning in a hotel in Boston and then ready to go on a flight. So I order my Uber, after I checked out, I hop on the Uber and I go over to the Boston airport and stand in a long line of hundreds of people to go through check-in. And then I finally go through the boarding line, not the boarding line, to the security line and grab some breakfast right there at the breakfast place. And then hop on the plane, jam-packed, middle seat, getting to Ohio. To then get off the plane in Ohio, order another Uber, chat with the Uber driver. He drops me off at the hospital at Ohio Health. And as for the very first time, I'm meeting my physician that is super excited to start the site of our clinical trial. I meet him at the Starbucks at the bottom of the hospital. Starbucks was jam-packed. We're standing in line together. And as we're in Starbucks, there's like half of his team is there, and they're all picking up their coffees and lattes. And as they're holding these in their hands, they introduce me to them. We shake our hands, and they're really good introductions. And after that, we go upstairs. And the first time I'm meeting the clinical study director for the study, and we have a good discussion. I brought my product with me, so you have good hands-on on all the devices. How they function, how they work. After we've done that, the physician, he walks me downstairs through the hospital all the way to the ORs and shows me, all the capabilities they have. There's a ton of staff there that introduces me to and is excited, to make all these introductions. We walk back upstairs, had about a 3-hour meeting and discussion. And after that, I leave super excited and hop back in the Uber, back into the airplane, come back to Boston. Now imagine, this was February 28th. What happens today? Just give you that perspective, things have changed, I would have never thought, that the simple thing that I did then could have so much value, which is something we don't really have today. So I thought I want to just bring that picture to all of you, and I'm sure you guys have traveled a lot as well and can relate to it. We don't have a lot of people on the call today. I think I can see all of them here. And, I just wanted to see with some of the, the attendees where they're from. So just with the raise of hands or so, the entrepreneurs, I know most of the people. I don't know Denise. I think I've seen Amy on another call before. And I certainly know Carol, Patrice, Elisa Boss, and Danielle, and Jenna. But yeah, Denise and Amy, I don't know either of you. Are both of you entrepreneurs as well? Maybe just raise your hand if yes. Okay. And then any one of you guys have experience with clinical trials? Doesn't have to be medical device, could also be drug trials or so. Just raise your hand as well if yes. Okay. Are any of you guys in the middle of a clinical trial right now? Yes. Oh, good. Denise, you and I will have a lot to talk.
Not anymore.
Say that again.
We're not anymore.
Okay.
We were at the front end of some of our work. Our work is funded through NIDA, National Institutes of Drug and Addiction, and Alcohol rather. Priorities changed. Everybody's expecting a high use and abuse of drugs, illegal and otherwise. So funds that were set aside for our work weren't committed yet. So our work is not being funded. We are kind of unusual in that our research, I come from the pharmaceutical functional biomarker research. I studied Alzheimer's, Namenda memantine, and retinal performance and visual fields with Alzheimer's. We've changed, we've switched over to marijuana and driving impairment. So that's not really a priority in any group, so our funds got cut. So our alternative had been to not funding, to get large numbers of data points at festivals. Marijuana is really hard to research, period, for a variety of reasons, including you can't legally in any way dose people. So all our work is kind of at a halt. However, we've teamed up with NEIT and we're developing a new product. So that's quite exciting. We immediately pivoted. We're looking to fund that, but anyway, I'm sorry. Keep going.
No, absolutely. I was exactly going to ask this question if you would be willing to kind of share, kind of what the trial you have going on or what was happening. So I appreciate you sharing this. That was help. And I think as we go through this conversation, there's a bunch of things that you can certainly, contribute to as well. So no, thank you, Denise. I appreciate it. And maybe what I want to do real quick too is share, what we've been doing at Lenos Medical as well, in regards of a clinical trial. So we're a spinal implant company. So we have a biological implant for spinal fractures. And we have started our clinical trial last year. We had one site going, and we're literally in the process, going to additional site. Like the story going to Ohio is a real story, that I really went to Ohio to start that new hospital in Ohio. And so literally we're really gearing up for these additional sites, and that's when the pandemic started to happen. And we're adopting to that, fairly quickly. I thought what I can do too is it might be helpful for everyone. I have 3 slides that I want to share that gives a little bit of an overview of, some of the effect of the pandemic on clinical trials. So give me a second here and I'll share this, this information, and hopefully this is going to be helpful for you. So let's see if I can get this full screen or not. Let me know if you can you still see this? Can you see this as a full screen? Okay, good. I got a thumbs up from Avi there. That's excellent. So just I'll share 3 insights and then a supplemental additional insight that may be interesting for Patrice to see as well. So this is actually the IRB, the external IRB that I'm using for our study. And they do some research because all their business is clinical trials. So they've been providing this information, up to date. So this is from May, I think May 3rd is when I did this poll. So clinical research sites open to enrollment. You can see early March, there's 62% of their sites that are, polling globally were open. And you can see how rapidly it declined to about 11% of sites still being open, for clinical trials. Now, I'm always a person who looks at a glass to be half full. So that I drew this blue circle. This is from me on top of the slide, where you can see that it went from 11% to 13%, indicating that it may now be on the uptick and turn around to actually improve in regards to sites being open. And they say this as well, for the first time in 8 weeks, the total number of sites open enrollment increased up to 13%. Glimmer of hope for sure. Any comments, thoughts on this particular slide? Anything to add from anyone?
So Dom, I had a question, Patrice. Which IRB are you using?
Western IRB.
So Western is a big one. So this is reflective of a lot of pharma studies for sure.
Right, yes. And I'll share the last slide as well. It's more in the COVID or pharma kind of trials. And yes, I think here they're saying they're tracking 1,250 sites. So I think that's
wow.
A fair indicator, right?
Yes.
Very good. Now, next one, thank you. I appreciate that, Patrice. So next one here, you see on top left, new industry sponsored trial starts. You see how many trials started in December versus, about 320 in April. So the start has gone down for sure for new trials. Now, the bottom little chart, you can see, number of studies ready to start. I think in other terms, that's the pent up demand. You can see January, February, how many studies wanted to be started. March and April, it's almost went double. These are kind of studies in the gates, kind of ready to go. It's almost like Denise, you were almost ready to go with your study. So you probably fall within this bucket there, but now you're pivoted, so you may no longer be there. So definitely, a lot of demand from the industry side to do studies. Go ahead.
Sorry, before you move on, this is Jenna. Are those additive? So in March, were there supposed to be 492 that did start plus an additional 463?
I think, so these are the ones they wanted to be started. So I think so. It's I don't think it's additive. It's a total in March. There's a total of 463 studies ready to be started. That's how I read it. And now in April, there's 477 studies to be ready to be started total. So I don't think it's additive.
Okay.
All right, very good. And now this slide again, I put the circle and the thumbs up there because I'm looking at the positive side. But if you digest this slide a little bit, it does show some good statistics here. So you see there's two surveys, the one that was just done in May 2nd, which is the dark green, and then the survey results with the hash lines, and that's from April 25th. And the question was, when do sites anticipate restarting screening? So when do they think they start screening patients again? And you can see in April when they were asked, 19% of the people you can see here thought in 2 to 4 weeks is when they start screening again. And then the same question asked in the May 2nd survey, over 50% thought they will start screening in 2 to 4 weeks. So that's a huge improvement. And I can relate to that as well in specifically, let's say our site in Ohio, they were starting to open a hospital as well. And they're starting to talk about this too. And they have opened up for COVID trials. They started to do COVID-based trials already like about a week ago. So I think that's encouraging to see. Now, since Patrice is on the call as well, I wanted to show this slide here as well. This looks a little bit complicated, but I think I can explain it to you a little bit, or Patrice can explain it probably even better. Two surveys, as of March 30th was the first survey to show the percentage of COVID-19 trials by type. And then as of May 1st, and you can see how it kind of has shifted. that more trials for COVID-19 are more in the sector of immune mediators. But I'm going to stop here for a second because I'm going out of my comfort zone, and this is probably more the comfort zone of other people, such as Patrice. So I stop here, and Patrice, if you have anything to add.
So what's fascinating to me, Dom, and believe me, I've looked at a lot of this data, but I'm nowhere near the expert, is how quickly studies that are doing combinations of antivirals, multiple agents, have moved at record-breaking speed compared to what we would have been traditionally doing in a pharma, which is slow and steady and methodical and filing protocols. And is that because the FDA is really encouraging these studies to, under an emergency use authorization, to get them into the clinic? I have a second question for you too. Oncology has been hit really hard with pauses and stops in the clinical trial domain. I know many of the companies we've been talking to are just in a hold mode. Is that your sense of the clinical trials in oncology as well?
I have no experience in the field of oncology, but in this report here from the VERB IRB, there was actually a mention, and I can share that with you too, offline as well, that they anticipate the oncology is going to increase the most over the next couple of weeks. So that's the uptick that they have been predicting.
That's good.
I don't have that slide in here, but they were actually alluding to that as well.
But when you think about these trials, the typical process to initiate a clinical trial, I mean, you know what it's like. The IRB approval, you got to get all the informed consents ready. It takes months and months and months. And think about how quickly the clinical trials have moved in this space. And then I'll shut up.
Yeah, that's, it's amazing. And, I just share, real life practical experience that happened in our case, and specifically at our site in Ohio. The very first thing that they, started up again is, COVID specific trials. And I was there on February 28th. Certainly there was no COVID-19 trial. And about 2 weeks ago, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, the study director said the thing they're focusing on right now is COVID-19 related trials. So like you said, like lightning speed, how they were kind of picking up to go for, COVID-19 related trials. So, and, I don't know the details of the trials and, the complexity of exactly what they're doing. I could envision some simpler ones going to IRBs a bit quicker than others. But yeah, there's a lot of, items to go through, as you know, to get the study started.
Yes.
No question about it. I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about some of just general headwinds and tailwinds as well, not even related medical or specifically, but any kind of, headwinds or tailwinds that we may have. And I share some of them with you with you guys that I've experienced, that are experiencing. Stop sharing the screen here so we can see each other again. And so, certainly there's headwinds and tailwinds. And, tailwinds on the positive side, if you talk about COVID-19 related trials, I think you have probably a very strong tailwind, as you kind of just pointed out, Patrice, that those trials are blazing super fast at this point. No question about it, because it's just such an important topic for everyone on this planet. But I'll talk first a little bit about some of the headwinds. What we have seen is, even though the patients are in severe pain, let's say for our particular indication, there is, spinal fractures or severe pain, and patients are immobilized and, can't do anything at home. Usually they go to the ER, but the physicians have spoken to me and said, the patients are just much more tolerant to the pain because they're scared to actually go to the hospital, go to the ER. And so that certainly is something that has been happening. even though these patients are in severe pain. And, Denise alluded to that, is like, in some cases, the trials are completely stopped. I mean, Denise, you made the example. In your case, it completely stopped. And I saw the same at our two. There's another site we're working on to get up and running at South Carolina. They just stopped to kind of recuperate and see what's going on and to get their bearings. So they were literally a complete stop. So certainly that affects, any kind of project plan that you had in place. And we talked about that earlier, that, shift of research to other priorities, such as COVID-19. And what's a bit challenging too, I alluded to very early on, my face-to-face trip to go and meet with the staff face-to-face, that's no longer that easily possible to do. But the startups is coming, but it's slower than we thought. So before I go into more of the tailwinds that we also can experience, any other headwinds that any one of you have experienced? I mean, Denise, you mentioned, what happened in your case, you had completely pivot, but anything else that you guys see or heard about some, headwinds or challenges for, clinical trials?
Not meaning to dominate the conversation, but it's exactly as you described. So we have been working with a company in the UK, and they do diagnostic sequencing for cancer patients for enrollment in clinical trials. And we've been interested in developing a partnership with them through Medley Genomics. And right now, they're totally on hold because right now they're not doing any diagnostic sequencing work for the partners that they have been working with, because their clinical trials are on hold. So it's not just the clinical trials, but it's all the aspects of the clinical trials. The diagnostic company helping with patient enrollment, the potential data analytics, all of these things are just really in this sort of, as you said, tailwind of what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I certainly see that too. And, on the flip side, with some of the positive things, and you just said, some support companies or so, some of them don't, kind of stop some of their work, but others, specifically clinical research organizations where this is their business, they're super eager to get things going. So they're proactive in helping in any ways they can, make things easier for the sites, for the hospitals. So they're very eager to go. And you see these slides here that I showed from the Verb IRB, that's a private organization as well, that's profit driven. So they're doing everything they can to make this going as well. So I feel that the support I've been receiving, particularly for our trial, from our CRO and from Verb, is just spectacular, because they just want to go. They're ready to go. And on top of that, what is really good to see, speaking to the physicians directly, is they are so ready to go. Because for some of them, and the ones I've spoken to are interventional radiologists, some of their procedures are non-essential, so they've kind of been put on hold. And again, some patients just didn't come in for some of these treatments, but the interventional radiologists also have treatments that are essential surgeries too. But generally they have kind of a backed up demand. So the physician were telling me, so what they're planning now for, as they have a little bit of downtime, but they're towards the end of this downtime, is that they're planning to increase their time of the surgery days. Instead of just 8 hours, maybe 10 hours of surgery days. And the physician I've spoken to in Chicago, he said what he will do is actually, or what they're planning at their hospital, is to open up Saturdays to do additional surgeries as well. And then the physician in Ohio, he mentioned the same thing. He said, look, we're going to have so much more demand. We're planning on opening up on, on the weekends to do some of those treatments. And so that's, to me, is promising to hear, as some people are probably getting tired of, just living with the pain and started to go to the hospital. I think for specific trials, depending on what treatment your product is helping with, you have different impact of the current situation. Like in our case, we're lucky that these procedures, these spinal fractures, are not considered, non-essential. So the physician can and is allowed to treat them, at least in the states that we're working with, which is it's a good sign. And also the decision of treating these patients or not treating the patients is within the treating physician. Yes, they have to follow the government guidelines as well, but ultimately they can make the decision that this patient with a spinal fracture, should it be treated or not. So these are certainly some of the tailwinds that I've seen. And again, I'm going to stop here for a second, and I have a few more, but I stop here for a second and see any comments from the audience.
Are you getting communication from the federal level about available funding or any kind of support that could be used for your work?
Well, not specifically for clinical trial. So I think, not that I'm aware of or not that I've seen, what I've seen certainly a tremendous effort specifically in Rhode Island, through the Rhode Island Commerce, the way they have been advocating their programs for these small businesses has been tremendous. The Paycheck Protection Program, there's so much, they have been providing in that regard, or also the EIDL program as well. So I think through these programs, I think any startup, I would encourage, to just look into it and apply for it. And Rhode Island Commerce and Rhode Island in general has done a tremendous job in supporting, those businesses. And sometimes I think startups are maybe more hesitant. They feel like they may not fit within this bucket, but they do, they do, because companies are affected by what's going on, and they're entitled for some of the stimulus money. But just specifically federal support for clinical trials, I have not heard anything. Have you?
No, that's why I was asking. I was wondering if there was any communication directly to entrepreneurs. It seems that there are layers that the communication goes through.
Yeah.
Denise here. What we have struggled with is our interface with the universities, because they all of a sudden got hit and overwhelmed with having to redo all their coursework and through internet and virtual courses. So that slowed down quite a bit, and we were really concerned about being able to support the interns that we had committed to for the summer, because their activities were supposed to have been face-to-face testing participants and volunteers. We find that young adults under the age of 30 work really well for helping us recruit and actually test our participants. So we did develop, and the pivot was really a benefit because now they're doing work from home that is basically not fun or necessarily supportive of their career goals, but it's enabling them to stay employed. So they're doing a lot of background research and writing.
Okay. That makes sense. And what I've learned too, some of our, study directors at the hospitals, they're the same thing. They're working from home, because they don't do patient treatments. So they happened, like study director at MUSC in South Carolina, so she would be working from home as well. And in that particular instant, it actually helped because it seemed her workload wasn't as big, so we had pretty decent access to her during the time. So that's pretty good. Another point I want to touch on as well, specifically a little bit in regards of some of the tailwinds, the positive aspects of it, is that I feel there will be an impact too, is that the hospitals are impacted financially. I'm not too familiar with the Rhode Island hospital financial situation, or the other hospital organizations within Rhode Island. Maybe Alyssa can speak to that a little bit. But I think there's an impact to the hospitals, certainly because they don't have the high profit procedures going on, hip procedures, other orthopedic procedures, that high revenue driving procedures for the hospitals. So I do feel the hospitals will start making decisions even more so based on how they can get back into better financial health. And depending on what type of product you have within a trial or not a trial is going to be affected by it. And if you're lucky enough, and I feel in our case, we're lucky enough that this, is a revenue generating procedure for the hospital. So if you're in this situation where you have a revenue generating procedure for the hospital is more interested in performing some of these procedures in order to get back to financial health. I'm very focused on, again, medical devices and to see the impact there, but any comments from anyone else specifically, when it comes to the hospitals and their financial impact and what you guys think is going to happen, as we get back out of the pandemic at this point?
I think something that I just found interesting in the conversation when Patrice was talking to you, Dom, is the difference between the pharmaceutical impact versus the medical device impact. I know you're asking about the hospital specific now, but obviously for a medical device procedure like the one you're working on, it's a much bigger impact because you need a hospital facility, an environment to complete the study. I think in pharma, what I've seen at a distance is, people are moving to try to keep the trials going for home infusions and things like that. So it'd be interested to see the data impact based on the two different industries.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Alyssa, I don't want to punch you out too much, but I know you've been immersed in some of the hospital environment locally here as well. Have you gotten any sense, or have you heard anything in regards of the situation with the local hospital systems? Is there anything that you'd be willing to share?
No, I think you've summed it up well. I think that they're certainly struggling, having to have turned away elective procedures and a lot of the non-COVID related work. They're all suffering financially, and I think you're right that they're going to be looking to ramp up very quickly to start bringing in more profitable business to try to make up for some of those losses.
Yeah, hopefully that will be the case, and hopefully the hospitals won't be impacted too severely. And we'll learn more too as we go along, because in our case, we're going to start working with Lifespan Rhode Island Hospital and kind of see, once we feel comfortable talking to them. And that kind of gets me kind of the next section, and maybe the last section of our discussion here is, what are some of the actions that anyone could take, who is in a situation like Denise and I, that, we're in clinical trials. And in our case, we'll continue our trial. In Denise's case, she mentioned they're pivoting and doing something a little bit different. So there's always options. And I just, said that, we're planning on talking to, a Rhode Island hospital, Lifespan, but we're waiting till the time is right, which I think is a key aspect right now. When you're in the middle of a clinical trial, you got to be sympathetic, empathetic, and you got to really focus on the proper communication at the right time. Because a lot of people within the hospital organizations or the study organizations, they're under a lot of stress as well, and they're adapting to kind of the new daily activities they have. So I think the communications are immensely important at this point. And it was important before, to communicate with all the hospitals and the people involved in the study. But today I feel it's even more so important to do the very good communication at the right time and be, empathetic to what people are going through. And you know, right now today here we're on a video conference, you know, it is great to see the face-to-face. You guys have known this too. Maybe you're now sick and tired of going to video conferencing, but we had one with the physicians, you know, 2 physicians and 2 staff members last week. And it was actually really good just to see the facial expressions. You can see how people feel. You know how it is when you see the people, it makes a huge difference. So what we're trying to do is having these conversations, you know, face to face via the video. I think it's extremely important. So the communication is key. Another thing is, so if you're blazing with a startup company, you know, time is everything. A day feels like a week, you know, a week feels like a month feels like a year. You got to go fast. You have investor money that you got to be very cost efficient with it, and you have milestones to meet. So you got to be creative. You got to do different things that maybe you weren't thinking of before. What can you do? Like, as an example, if you had one trial site going and, you know, has slowed down because of what's happening today, you got to consider adding additional sites. So all of a sudden, instead of having just one site going slow, maybe you have 4 sites going slow, but overall timeline is shorter, or at least not extended to what it was before. But when you do that, you know, certainly you got to consider cost as well, because adding any site, it adds additional cost. So I think you be careful about the balance of how much more cost you're going to incur because you add new sites versus how much time you're gonna save. But that's an important part, you know. What can you do as a startup specifically to keep your timelines and keep cranking to get your trial completed in time? So that's certainly something that we're trying to do as well. And then I think, since if let's say you can't avoid some sort of delay, it's important to be cost effective, you know, try to save costs where you can, you know, maybe when you knew, or when we started to know, look, this is going to be a little bit time till it goes back to normal, you can call a CRO and say, cut down a cost, you know, or you can put a CRO on hold for 2 weeks or so and save some cost with doing that. So there's certainly a bunch of things that can be done. And some of the other things is, you know, follow-up visits from patients. How are they going to be performed? In some cases, the hospitals won't allow the patients come in for follow-up visits. So you got to manage around that. And in some cases, they can do the follow-up visits on a virtual video call as well. And it's actually even more efficient, so they don't have to travel in and do it there. Just got to make sure, if you have a trial that requires other services, such as imaging, X-rays or CTs or MRIs or something like that, you got to make sure that, you know, those services are still available at the particular site. And so certainly there's a lot of things that you can do, you know, to work around it, but you got to be proactive. You got to be aware of what's going on. You got to have the conversations with the people. And not only, I think you have to have the conversations with the people at the particular sites. I feel like I've become a fanatic about what's going on in Ohio, because that's where my next site is. So I didn't know who the governor was of Ohio before. I definitely know who the governor is of Ohio now. And I know what their trend is with the COVID and everything, to see what they're doing. And, you know, lucky enough, that particular state is doing really, really good. And so I keep a close eye on that. And I would suggest for everyone to do the same thing. You know, keep a close eye on the state you're operating in, because every state is a little bit different. It's almost like, you know, going back to Europe, where every country is a little bit different. It's the same here with the states. I'm kind of bringing this to a summary at this point. I took a few notes on this. I think a key thing is just be aware. You know, it's the worst thing you can do is just kind of ride the wave. That's not the right thing to do. Is like, you got to be aware what's going on, what's happening. And then I think it's important to be creative. You know, it's like, this is an opportunity, this is a situation where you may be able to make a good opportunity out of this. You may be able to build even stronger relationships with your clinical sites because of what's going on, and pulling through it together and make this a good success. And I do feel, you know, as I mentioned earlier, being, you know, sympathetic, empathetic to the situation is important. You know, you're dealing with very important relationships that make or break, you know, what you have going on at these clinical sites. And so having those relationships is super important, more important than ever before. And I think if you're creative enough, you can get through this. And the tailwinds we talked about, I think will help you or help anyone to come back out of this even more successfully and even stronger at the other end.